Recording.
I'm recording. All right, so I guess today we're gonna flip the tables and I'll ask you some questions and learn a little bit about your perspective on things.
All right.
So first tell us maybe about a little bit about your background and who you are, other than my brother.
Right. So my name is Joshua Lovelace. Academically, I got my bachelor's at UCSD in math. I also studied Spanish and a little bit of economics because initially I wanted to be a linguistics major, but then I changed to a math major.
Yeah, so linguistics and economics. I didn't actually know about the economics one. That's interesting. Was that in high school or when were you looking into that?
That was UCSD.
UCSD.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, because I know you were learning Spanish even before you went to college.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I wanted to be a linguist.
Right, I do remember that.
Mhm.
And wait, you did a double major at one point.
No, I switched math to be my major,
Mm-hmm.
and I just kept a minor in Spanish.
Minor. Okay, got it.
And when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do. It was like, go to school to get a degree because that's what everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went to work for our dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a loan officer for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and it was rough for me.
Mm.
And the idea initially was, hey, you speak Spanish, so you could take all our Spanish speaking clients.
Yeah, and that's very beneficial for him.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and for you. I mean, win-win.
Mm-hmm. The challenge was it was a big learning curve,
Mm-hmm.
and I got frustrated with it. So then I went to work for Wells Fargo Home Mortgage,
Mm-hmm.
and I started as post close. I was processing files that had closed, mortgages that had closed, and then I
Mm-hmm.
went to become a processor. So I was processing files and sending them to docs,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a bit like office space for me. And it was good money, but it was pretty boring.
Yeah. Were you able to like use any math knowledge or economics, or was it just pushing papers and
It was pretty simple,
yeah?
like computing interest. You multiply by a decimal.
Mm-hmm.
Like for 6% interest, you multiply by 0.06, and
Right. So you didn't necessarily need a math degree to do
right,
those things.
right.
Okay.
Um, and it was, yeah, it was good money, but I wasn't super fulfilled by it. And also, I was working in subprime, and I had all these files go across my desk that wouldn't qualify.
Subprime. So what year was this? This was before like the crazy crash, and this is
Mhm.
when the subprime was happening.
Yeah,
So you saw some of that
I
firsthand.
did.
Yeah.
And so my job was to clear conditions before a file would go to docs and be
Mm-hmm.
signed. And I had a lot of files that didn't qualify. And then the sales guy would call my manager, and then they'd wave it through anyway. And
Mm.
I got really frustrated with this and thought, oh, this is not good for the client. They're going to go like bankrupt in 3 years. Like, how
Yeah.
is this good for the bank exactly? And it just so that was definitely the writing on the wall.
Right. Well, what's the payout structure? I know for like real estate agents, right? They get a commission just for getting a deal,
Mhm.
and they don't care if it goes in foreclosure or whatever. They got their check, right?
Right.
But what's the bank's motivation to like push these subprime things at the time?
It depends on the bank.
Uh-huh.
So some banks collect interest. What a lot of banks do is they just turn around and sell it as an investment.
Mm.
For example, the government sells bonds, and the
Mm-hmm.
idea is you collect money on the bond, but you could also sell the bond.
Mm-hmm.
And so the bank does something similar with a mortgage. So they'll like one bank will create the loan and they'll sell it to another bank.
Right.
And well, we can get into the details of 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what happened is that these mortgages then went to become part of portfolios. And the idea of a portfolio is you have stocks, you have bonds, and some of them had mortgages in there as like their assets.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my only education on this stuff is like watching movies. Like,
Oh,
I don't know if you watched
The Big Short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve Carell and they had like an all-star cast in there. I can't remember. Like, is DiCaprio in that one? No. Anyways, yeah. So they put them in like these packages, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know, they bribed like some agencies to say that they're like solid gold, even though they're just full of crap.
Well, not that. In my understanding, and I don't know all the details, but my understanding is that they had these packages, and then they use those packages to create other packages. So the
Mm.
idea is like when you take out a loan, you're borrowing on your house. So they called these mortgage-backed securities,
Yeah. That's what.
and then they would like borrow on these assets, and then they'd create these other assets, financial
Mhm.
instruments based on those assets. So it was like this stacked.
Yeah. So you lose track of the source. It's almost like laundering the source of value or something.
Something like that.
That's what it reminds me. It's like if you pass through enough channels and you're just like, okay, where did this originate from? You kind of lose sight of it. And you just like, oh, it's a security that has this X value.
Yeah, it seems like a shell game.
Shell game, yeah. Okay, so when you were working as a processor,
Loan
loan
processor.
processor, so you saw a lot of this and people going over your head and like okaying things when you clearly showed that the math didn't make sense.
Yeah. And so one of the things they had was they had some programs called stated income where
Hmm.
you just state your income.
Hmm.
And then they had another product called um an ARM, which is adjustable rate mortgage.
Hmm.
And so they had like a 3-1 ARM, which means it would be fixed for 3 years and then it
Hmm.
would be adjustable after that.
Hmm.
And it's a ticking time bomb if you know the person doesn't really qualify. So you say, okay, you're going to get this loan for 3 years, and then
Right.
then what?
Right. It's like one of those introductory cable offers, internet offers. Get fast internet for $30, but only for the first 3 months, and then we're gonna triple the cost. Yeah.
Right. And what some people would do is they would flip houses, right? They just own it for a year or two, and if
Mm.
the market's hot, you don't you
The
don't
arm doesn't
care.
matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But when the market's not hot, it's trouble.
Yeah. Huh.
So anyways, I was asked to tutor one of my coworkers' kids in math, and I absolutely loved it. And this kid like lit up and he just aced all his classes and he was super confident. And I thought, man, this is so much more fulfilling than pushing
Hmm.
paper.
That's cool. I didn't know that's where that originated from. That love of education and teaching.
Mhm.
Do I know the person?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but it was just like they knew you had done math as a college student. They're like, hey, my kid needs help.
Yeah.
Cool.
And that's why I decided, okay, I want to go back to school, get my master's
Hmm.
and teach math.
Yeah, so you got your master's in math.
Mhm.
Did you take any like education or courses or like
No,
courses on how to teach?
no. So I'm all self-taught in that sense, but I was obsessed. Like I would watch Stand and Deliver and you know the Freedom Riders and like all these
Dead Poet Society or something?
yeah, inspiring teacher movies because
Yeah.
like I want to be that kind of teacher.
Yeah.
And I also remember when I was learning, it was very important for me to know how to explain it. So it
Mhm.
wasn't just like I want to figure this out so I can do it. I want to figure this out so I can explain it.
Right.
It's a different mindset
I've
when you're
had,
learning.
sorry to interrupt. I was
Mhm.
gonna say I had some teachers that it looks like they're almost trying to show off. It's like, look what I can do. Look how cool this is. And they're not, their goal isn't to inform you or teach you. It's more to like say, like,
Like
look how
impress
smart
you,
I am or something.
impress
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
And yeah, ain't nobody got time for that. So sorry, just gonna want to linger on this a little bit more. So when you had that experience with like tutoring that kid and you were and like putting that experience next to your job as like a processor,
Yeah.
it sounded like you got a lot more like, what was it, like more
Fulfillment.
fulfillment, like
Yeah.
someone was really appreciated what you had done and that you
Yeah.
actually could see that you've did like they tell you like if they got it like A's or something,
Yeah.
they increased their grades and
Yeah.
were performing better, right?
Hmm.
So that I feel like that in general is really important,
Hmm.
just to have some kind of, I don't know, a sense of you matter. But like
Hmm.
if you're a loan processor and people are overriding what you're saying, there's not a lot of you matter in that, in the way you're describing it. Would you agree? Or
Yeah, and like I referenced the movie Office Space, but it really did feel like that. We had the rah-rah meetings, and if you could come in on Saturday, that would be great.
oh man. And then I'm just remembering that guy who got in the near fatal car crash. It's like, man, someday you could be as lucky as me. Like, that was better than his job, basically. It's like, okay. Well, that's super cool. I didn't know that's where it started. Okay, so you got excited about the prospect of teaching and making a change in someone's life, like a direct change. And then so you went to get your master's.
Yep.
In math. And while you were getting your master's, so I know in graduate school I was also required to teach or do some kind of teaching assistance. Were you doing anything like that in your master's program?
I did. It wasn't necessarily required, but I wanted to do it because I wanted to teach. And I also tutored. So I worked as a tutor, and I tutored all subjects, and I taught, and I took classes. I went a little overboard because I was pretty shy in high school, and I didn't really play all out for my bachelor's. I went through some tough times. And
what do you mean play all out? I mean, like,
I was just kind of going through the motions.
Yeah.
And I think I got like a 3.0 GPA. Like, it wasn't awful, but it wasn't
That's good.
ambitious.
Right.
And when I went to do my master's, I wanted to just do it all. So I also got involved in being part of the student government, and I was president of a student club, and I was doing all sorts of activist stuff in addition to teaching, tutoring, and doing my master's.
Wow. So it sounds like there's a lot of drive in you once you get something that like grabs your focus. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So then after you got your master's, you made the choice. Like, when did you make the choice that you wanted to teach as like your main career? Was that as you were getting your math degree? Like, the reason you're getting your math degree is to teach?
Yeah.
Or okay. So that's when you made the decision to teach. Okay. Cool. All right. So then what range of math classes have you taught?
I've taught pretty much all the undergraduate courses. I mean, there might be a few that I haven't, but yeah, algebra, pre-calculus, stats, calc 1, calc 2, just like a general math for education, nursing stats, like all sorts of, yeah.
But okay, but it's mostly at the college levels.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said you did some tutoring too. Have you tutored like younger kids in like high school or
here and there? Yeah.
Okay. I guess the reason I'm asking is I'm kind of curious, like how if teaching math changes across the ages, or if like if you're learning, what multiplication is, and then as you get higher up, is the way math is taught at different levels different?
Well, we talked a little bit about this previously, and that is when you're doing math, normally it's about calculation, and it's about solving equations and solving problems, and you learn techniques to solve problems. And then at some point it shifts to where you're writing proofs. And that's where it's a paradigm shift for people that they may not be ready for or expecting.
Okay. So do you have classes that you teach that you expect them to write proofs, or at the undergraduate level?
Yeah, in one of them. But they're very simple proofs. It's like an introduction to mathematical ideas. It's the name of the course, Math 100.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting course.
Just like, yeah, how to think mathematically. And yeah, so you're saying is most people are trained on like rote memorization of this is how you plug in the thing and move the number. But
which is useful. I mean, it's useful to have your times tables memorized. That way you can move through things quicker.
Oh yeah, like memorizing those things. But like, I feel like a lot of people have the impression that that's just what math is memorizing shorthand tricks to come up with the answer and pass a test.
Hmm.
So have you done like applied math courses?
I mean, stats.
Stats, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Or like any like physics?
I haven't done physics.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious because essentially math is used in like all sorts of different disciplines.
So we do have this one course which is math for business and life sciences.
Hmm.
And some of the applications are about compound interest or population growth,
Hmm.
things like this. And yeah,
And you mentioned also like nursing statistics or
yeah.
something.
Mhm.
So what's that?
It's stats for biology,
Hmm.
essentially.
So like experimental biology or
Um, it's more like understanding how to like read statistics and how to interpret you know charts and things like that,
okay.
like percentage of a false positive on a test, and
Hmm.
what do you do about that?
Yeah. Okay. So like, so I'm just curious of the kinds of students and the kind of people you get in those kind of courses, like nurse nursing statistics versus just like Calc one
Mhm.
or something. It's just like a hardcore. It's like this is just math, and we need to learn the excuse me the relationships between these variables and how it works, and the the concepts of calculus versus like population measurements or like the chances of someone contracting disease or whatever, like when reading charts. Is there a difference in the way that you teach those and also the way the students like are receptive to what's going on?
Yeah, I try to give them more examples and make it more relevant to them to the
Mhm.
best of my ability. It's also tricky because I've taught parallel courses where one class has freshmen and sophomores, and the other one has graduate students in a
Mm,
cohort, and same lectures, same everything, and the graduate students almost all get straight A's.
mhm.
They do all their homework, and then the other class they struggle. So it's clearly an issue of maturity for the students,
Yeah.
and it's a struggle, I think, for instructors because you want to deliver high quality content at the same time you want your students to be successful. So then the question is, what do you do about that? Do you slow down the course so they learn something, but what they do learn, they learn well, or do you maintain the standard and give them feedback based on the learning outcomes?
Right. So I mean that's like a never ending like tug of war, right? And
Yeah.
so yeah. Well, okay. So I have another question. Maybe we'll get back to that. But I have another question. I know I've talked to you about this, I don't know, many years ago, but you've had this sense that some people have just some, or a lot of people have like an aversion to math or some kind of like, I'm bad at math. And then that is like a self-fulfilling prophecy and then they don't like it.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit or maybe go into detail and explain some examples of what you've seen?
Yeah. And well, some people have a phobia of math and maybe even a trauma, and other people just have like an aversion in terms of like an identity, like I'm not a math person.
Hmm.
And if it's an emotional challenge, then you can hopefully work them through emotionally, or if it's a mental block, you can work them through mentally. That's not something you could do with a class per se, but you could definitely do it one-on-one if they come in for office hours or tutoring.
Hmm.
um yeah, so some people just think I'm bad at math, and then you just have to take some steps and have them practice the steps, and then they look at the evidence like you did this,
Hmm.
and then they realize, oh, I can do this.
Right. So the evidence, meaning like explaining why it works rather than just like telling them some trick to get to the answer. Or,
Both, I mean, you could build it up in steps and then show them, hey, you did this, and then they realize it's not that they're bad at math, they just need to learn the
mhm.
skill.
Yeah. When do you think the whole like I'm bad at math starts for most people that have that kind of phobia, math phobia? Or is it different for everyone then?
It's probably different for everyone. I read this really interesting book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And he points out, this shocked me because the book is about success, but towards the end of the book, it starts talking about math. What? And I fell in love with this book. He talks about how English is linguistically awkward for math. So for example, we say 23, which when you write it, it's 23. That's the decimal place value system, right? But if you say 13, you're saying 310. So the way you say it is switched around for the teens.
Right.
And then you have numbers like 11, which isn't 10-1.
Yeah.
Or 1 teen.
Right.
It's this weird number. And there are all sorts of examples like that in English where the language doesn't jive with the math. And for kids who are not only learning language, but being thrown into math, and they have an impatient teacher says, what are you, stupid? This is obvious. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
This is really weird.
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, I mean, I only speak English and I've grown up with it. It just seems so natural. Like I wouldn't even have thought of that. Of having like the language itself having like the sounds of the words and the numbers flipped depending on what it is. You just learn it. Yeah.
But in other languages, it's totally lined up. It's organized. So the way you say it is the way it reads. And so there's less cognitive friction when you're learning math as a kid.
Yeah. I wonder if there's like something like if there's like some incidence of dyslexia, and if like people who speak English have higher incidences of dyslexia just because there's so many of these like weird contextual rules that you have to keep in mind.
Could be. I mean, like reading Chinese seems a mystery to me.
Totally different system, right?
Yeah. And that's fascinating to me too.
Well, the whole concept of how like language is so central, like even there's arguments that when we think, we're thinking in like in a language. It's not just some like amorphous thing. We like organize our thoughts in whatever language,
or that language shape our thoughts.
Or I haven't experienced this, but I think you have, since you speak both English and Spanish. Is like you can have dreams sometime and the people talking could be talking in either language. Can they like have some pigeon like mixing going on during the dreams?
But they understand each other because it's in my mind, so they understand each other, even though in real life they wouldn't.
It's pretty fascinating. Okay, so Malcolm Gladwell was talking about how just the language itself maybe could make it confusing for kids that are learning the language and learning math. And that could, do you think that could also make them afraid or phobic of like reading and English?
Maybe. I mean, I think anything can be a phobia, but I think he was tracking statistics and like why English speakers seem to be having more trouble with math than say Asian cultures. And another thing that's interesting to think about is the Roman numeral system. Can you imagine doing arithmetic with Roman numerals? Because you have like IVs, you have to subtract the 1 from the 5, and there's all this mental arithmetic just to like figure out what the number is.
If it's on the left side or the right side, it's like minus or plus. And the number itself has math in it, so that's crazy. Well, another thing too, so now we're getting like the history of math. So isn't like Hebrew, like the letters and are also the numbers?
Greek, that's Greek also.
Okay. Oh, right. So like alpha, beta, it's like 1, 2. Yeah. So, okay. Do we know where math originated? Or is that prehistoric?
Depending on how you define math. Counting is universal. We talked a little bit about this last time, where like geometry means earth measure, and was developed when people had agriculture because there was a necessity for measuring the land.
Mhm.
And you could also say with agriculture also comes the calendar because you want to track the seasons and you're
Mhm.
sedentary, so you're watching the stars and figuring out when it's going to be springtime to plant. And
You need numbers.
yeah.
And also some kind of record keeping, like writing or something to.
Mhm.
So those are probably hand in hand. Also, okay, what about like yeah, math, I guess, is a pretty broad term. I know it was algebra is like from ancient Babylon. No.
It's actually Arabic,
Okay.
algebra.
Interesting.
Mhm.
When do you know like roughly the year or time or
I don't, but it was definitely Arabic, and it was imported to Europe by um, Fibonacci. That's one of other than the Fibonacci sequence. He like imported algebra. I think Marco Polo might have contributed to that too.
wow. That's pretty wild.
That was the Italian Renaissance.
Yeah, yeah. And so like also, you see ancient relics like the pyramids too, or like these monuments that obviously require some sort of mathematical understanding, right? Stonehenge, they argue that's also like involved with the calendar and keeping track of things. Okay, sorry, totally got off track here. So
No, it's great.
yeah, no,
It's the wonder part.
right, yeah, it's super cool. So the original conversation was talking about like math phobias and what where the kids or people who are learning math develop an idea of I'm not a math person or I'm bad at math. And so one point you made was Malcolm Gladwell's like the language could be a factor in how it's confusing in English and how math works. So what are some other things you think could be contributing to?
People have bad habits in terms of conceptualizing things, and it's no wonder. I mean, math is like a foreign language, and most people learn it in terms of just rote memorization, which is fine, it's functional, but the way you conceptualize it influences how you think about it and then how you work with it, your ability to solve problems.
Okay. And when do you think that starts happening, like age grade wise?
It can happen whenever. I mean, in grade school, or when you see X and you're just moving stuff around, you're like, why are we doing this? And you learn the division algorithm, and it's this weird pattern. You're like, okay, we're doing this division algorithm. Why? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, okay. I guess the reason I'm kind of like poking around is I'm thinking because you also mentioned like being a math person or bad at math is like an identity thing. And I'm wondering, since we both kind of know psychology is like as a child develops, they're also developing an identity. And when you go to school, you don't go to school in isolation, right? You're surrounded by a group of other kids that are doing the same kinds of things. And you can see someone, oh, this person knows how to do this problem and I'm having trouble.
Yeah.
And then some kind of comparison that's going on. And in that context, maybe that's the only reason, oh, I'm a bad math person. I'm not a math person. I'm not
relative to.
Right. And if you didn't have that, I don't know. Do you think that would develop?
It's hard to say. It also depends like what you mean by math person. Like a lot of people don't even try because they think they can't do it, and then some people have legitimate disabilities. So I'm talking about the people in the middle who are have the capacity but have a mental block. Those are the ones you want to reach.
Yeah. I have a specific memory in fifth grade when we were just starting to introduce letters into the math. And I thought, like, this is just absolute madness as a kid. Like, this, like, no, math does not have letters. This is just some, like, really like old people know what this is, and I don't need to know this or something. It's just such a foreign thing. It's like I'll never like understand this because it's so foreign. But you take algebra, like what I guess you start that in like fifth grade or sixth grade, and once you actually understand it, like you said, you lay it out in front, and you're just like, then they're like, whoa, that's crazy, and then I think that understanding is important and to not be intimidated by like something that literally like that's where the term like oh it all looks Greek to me, right?
Right.
um and I don't know how one would accomplish that, or maybe do you have different strategies to get over that hump? What does
Yeah,
that look like?
you just got to break it down into the smallest pieces and just work on the smallest pieces and then build it up. So you get the foundation, then do the next step and the next step.
Mhm. All right, so if you were talking to me as a fifth grader who's like, letters and math, this is insane. Like, I'm never going to understand this, and only like super mathematicians and scientists and old people understand this. Like, how would you explain what letters are doing next to numbers to someone who's just thinks this is madness?
Well, it's like a guessing game,
Hmm.
and it's like a puzzle, and you're trying to figure out what number would solve the puzzle.
Hmm. So you put it into the context of a game then, right? Or age appropriate, like that. Okay. Yeah, that definitely would increase the interest, I think. Yeah. Okay. So have you worked with like grade schoolers or middle schoolers? Or maybe a tutoring?
Yeah, middle schoolers for sure, high schoolers for sure. I don't know about elementary.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious. And then, but I mean, so the majority of your math teaching is all at like the college level. Maybe algebra to what, like Calc 2?
Mhm.
Would that be the highest course?
Mhm.
Okay. So I also want to get into this. So so far we've been talking about, I'm a bad math person, or not bad math. Not I'm not good at math. I'm not a math person. So there's those type of people. Have you also interacted or taught people who were just a math person? They're like super into it, and how does teaching those people look like?
Oh, that's great. And what happens is they actually are curious about the proof.
Mhm.
So like I'll give a theorem and I'll show how to solve problems. And then they'll say, well, how do you know that's true? I'm like, that's a really good question.
Mhm.
And so then I'll show them the proof and their eyes light up. Like, this is so cool. Like, I know you should be a math major.
I forget what movie it was, like Beautiful Mind or something. There's like numbers on a page and they start like moving around and rearranging. Like, wow, I see it.
Well, and I remember the first time I saw a proof for the quadratic formula, it blew my mind because you look at it and it's like, negative b plus or minus the square root of b
Yeah.
squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You just
Mhm.
memorize that. You're like, where does this come from? Space? Like what?
Alien transmission.
Yeah, like what in the world is this thing?
Yeah.
And you plug it in and you simplify it. And when you see where it comes from, it's like, whoa,
Mhm.
this is a technology that someone developed, like an intellectual technology,
Yeah.
and that's really cool to me.
Mhm.
And I know historically people were fascinated by the proof of the Pythagorean theorem because people use it in geometry all the time, but to prove it, that's really where math as an art begins.
Right. In getting into the realm of proving things. No, I know we talked about this. I'm going to go off on a tangent since you're talking about proofs and proving. Because
As long as it's not parallel
parallel.
as opposed to tangent. Har har har.
Sorry, that's a math joke over my head.
It's an awful pun. Terrible joke.
Sorry. I must not be a math person. No, I do like math. Yeah, so I remember we had some conversations, and I think your thesis even had to do something about this with P and NP or complete or
That's information theory.
okay. But it's like, I don't know, who's it? Was it I forget, was it Turing? You can tell me, but basically, if a system is open, you can't prove anything? Or no, explain that to me.
You might be
There's
thinking,
open and closed systems, and then
you might be thinking of Gödel's incompleteness
yeah,
proofs.
maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
So he showed that if a system is complete, it has contradictions in it, and if it's consistent, it'll always be incomplete. And he showed it for arithmetic, but you could generalize it to other stuff.
So the reason I was thinking about that, and you talked about like a mathematical proof, and I'm thinking, okay, well, is that true just within some constraint of math rules that we've developed? Like, could there be inconsistencies given the framework of
math?
the Gödel's incomplete or completeness? Or maybe you can explain that to me a little differently.
So the way I think about it is math is consistent and incomplete, which means it's logically consistent and coherent, but there's always more to find. There's always more that we don't know.
Well, okay. I thought that's not a very exciting statement. There's always more that we don't know. That's just like infinity, right? You can make any. Okay. I thought it was a little more like, you have some axioms or some like basic, like if you give me A, B, C, then I can make all of this work.
You can.
Right. But if you have a different set of premises, maybe your proof no longer is relevant.
Well, you could think about it as like a different knowledge tree where you have the axioms, which are like the seeds or the roots, and then the inferences grow from there. So if you have different axioms, you could have different inferences, which is where you get non-Euclidean geometry.
Non-Euclidean.
Yeah, so Euclidean geometry is on the plane or in a sphere, and the famous parallel postulate says parallel lines never cross. But if you throw that axiom out and tweak around with the logic, you can have some really weird and interesting inferences. This goes back to what we were talking about last time, where mathematicians will sometimes play with stuff because they like playing with stuff.
Right, and then find out some weird connection to reality or physics.
Or someone needs it. Yeah, like, Euler's was working with imaginary numbers and angles, and turns out that's really good for mapping rotation. Who knew?
Right, yeah. That is crazy. And now, I use imaginary numbers a lot in my research, looking at oscillations, like brain waves. It's all phases and imaginary numbers, and you can look at it. It's crazy. Like, I would never have guessed in, a million years that imaginary numbers would be crucial for understanding brain activity. But it just pops up. Right. You're just like, why is I in this thing? And it all comes back to like the unit circle. Right. Trigonometry. Triangles explain like sinusoidal oscillations. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So I guess my main thing when I was going down this rabbit hole of axioms and incompleteness is like, and you're saying like, when you have a proof that this is true, there's still some constraint. Like, it's true. This proof works under this closed system.
Yeah.
Is that
that's one way to think about it? Well, let's also discuss the opposite. So if someone claims, I have a theory that contains all knowledge, like an ideology, like this is the complete truth, it's going to have some contradictions in it.
All right. So if it's closed, there's internal contradictions. And then if it's open.
Well, so yes, the idea is if it's consistent, it has to be incomplete. And if it purports to be complete, it will have contradictions. It'll be inconsistent.
And he proved this mathematically. That's pretty wild. So what kind of like philosophical implications does that have? Or does it? It seems like there must be.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like some paradox of the universe is finite theoretically, but not.
Well, the realm of knowledge, I guess, what can be known.
Yeah.
That's infinite.
Yeah. Okay. I'll have to think about that one. Unless you have some more
Oh, that'll
comments or
take you a
insights.
lifetime to
Well,
contemplate.
I know. It doesn't mean we shouldn't start.
Yeah, I hear you. But it's also humbling, right?
Mhm.
You think, we know so much. It's like, yeah, well, compared to infinity, what we know is pretty small.
Mhm. Right. That's another thing that blew my mind is I was watching some documentary. I think the documentary is called Infinity or something like that, and how there's different kinds of infinity, and you can think about infinity in different ways that turns out to be really interesting.
Mhm.
Like countable versus non.
Uncountable.
Yeah. So can you explain that?
Well, accountable means you can count it. So
Mhm.
for the natural numbers, right, or the whole numbers,
Mhm.
where you just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you could count to infinity,
Mhm.
but they're in order.
Mhm.
But if you say, how many numbers are between 0 and 2? If you have a continuous line,
Okay.
it's infinite,
Infinite. Yeah.
but you can't put them in order.
Why can't you put them in order?
Well, it's tricky because you could say, well, what's the first number after 0?
Right.
And then you say, well, it's 0.00001, but then you could add an extra
Yeah.
0, and then you could add an extra 0.
Mhm.
So you have this like infinitesimal leading up to 0.
Right.
And you could do that with any point.
Mhm.
So the infinities, they call it dense. The infinity is so dense that you can't order it.
Mhm.
You can't organize it.
There was a one strategy in this documentary. I didn't fully understand it, but it sounded like they devised some interesting tricks. So one way was like, okay, so you have like an infinity number of a line with infinity numbers, and then what you can do is like essentially put a space in between each one of those numbers, and then insert their intermediaries between each one.
Hmm.
And if you do this process, you can somehow. I'm not a mathematician, but it was fascinating. It sounded like they came up with some ways to think about infinity that made it manageable, like in mathematical terms.
Mhm.
Maybe you should watch it sometime. I don't know.
Well, there's a similar one, and I forget who did this, but the idea was imagine you have a circle,
Mhm.
and there's a point at each point on the circumference, right?
Mhm.
There's an infinite number of
Mhm.
points, it's continuous.
Mhm.
And then what you do is you double the radius,
Mhm.
and then you draw a line from each point on the first circle connecting to a point on the
Mhm.
second one,
Mhm.
like a radial line.
Yeah.
It turns out the density of infinity on the big circle is equal to the density of the infinity on the small circle, even though it's doubled in
Right.
size.
Right. That's cool. So I understand like visualizations like that way better than I do with like just like a string of numbers and like imagining it. But that's crazy. So even though it's double the size, the densities, that's weird.
It's the same size infinity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wild. Okay, so that was a fun tangent.
Yes.
So
or parallels.
yeah. All right, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit more about like teaching in general.
Mhm.
So for college students, what do you think is the best way to organize a class or the most students get the most out of the class?
Well, ideally, you want to have everyone at the same level of preparation.
Mhm.
And once you do that, then there are two principles that are really valuable for learning in general, not just for math. So one's called spaced repetition,
Mhm.
where you learn something and then you repeat it, and then you repeat it, and then you repeat it.
Mhm.
And you can stretch out the interval. So let's say you're learning a language and you practice a verb every day, and then you practice it once a week, and you do that for like 4 weeks, and then you practice it once a month. So you don't need to do it every single day once you've like got it, but you got to keep practicing it to keep it sharp in your mind. And then the second principle is what's called practice recall.
Mhm.
And that's where you pull it out of your memory. And as you exercise pulling it out of your memory, your memory strengthens. So spaced repetition and practice recall. And I try to do weekly quizzes with people, and that just gives them a pace. And then I have an exam where it brings it all together.
So the quizzes, so that's like the quizzes seem like more of like how the class is structured. But do you have assignments that you give out, or homework that's doing this, like repetition, spaced repetition, and also test recall?
Yeah, so the homework is the spaced repetition, and the quizzes are practice recall.
Got it. Okay, I see.
And I also tell students that when you study math, there's this temptation to just read the solutions. And what you end up doing is tricking your mind into thinking you understand it. It's like you're reading it and you intellectually say, I understand the steps, but then when you get the quiz and you have to perform, you haven't practiced recall. So it's much better to practice questions from scratch so that you're like pulling it out of your memory rather than just visually recognizing how to do it.
Right, that's why you get assigned the odd numbered questions in the math book. Because the even ones have the answers, and that's not
yeah, the other way around.
Right, it's important to test the recall because that in and of itself is important. And you can trick yourself. I like the way you said that, trick yourself into thinking you understand it, or
where you're just recognizing you're not understanding it.
Yeah. Okay. And then so testing. So how important do you think like testing is?
It's important. I mean, the whole point of a test is to test what someone knows. You're trying to measure what they know. And a better question might be, how important is grading? And that to me is the challenge, because I always try to give people partial credit. So in my mind, I have a map of knowledge, and I sort of rank the important ideas, and then the small tools that you need to complete a problem. And I designed the question to test for the central idea. For example, let's say it's the Pythagorean theorem. Like that's the central goal of the question. Do you know the Pythagorean theorem? Well, one of the steps might be, doing algebra with an equation, or squaring both sides. And if you mess up squaring both sides, it's like, okay, that's like a smaller error. But if you don't know what the Pythagorean theorem is, that's a really big problem. So I'd score the question based on the importance of the idea and how much of the micro skills they've mastered.
Well, that's good, because then it also signals to the student, like, to direct them what to focus on. It's like, you got this wrong, it really hurt. Learn this because it's important.
Right.
Yeah.
And I try to give them as detailed a feedback as possible. And it's tough, you have 200 students, but ideally, if they take that feedback to heart, then they can use it as a study tool. That's how I see it.
Right, the grading. So okay, so tests are one, I guess in my mind, a test is almost like to be able to assign some measure of competence to the individual. Right, so if you've got an A, it means you know the material really well and you have proof, goes on your transcript, and then that goes along. It's like an achievement. But the other thing it sounds like is that the test itself could also be used as a learning tool.
Yes. Except the final. So and the reason I say that is because typically I'll return these tests, I'll give them feedback, but the final I don't give them back. It's like top secret, because I might be using these again.
Right. Well, I think one could argue that even the final could be as a learning tool.
For sure. And if students come to me and say, I'd like to see my final, I'll show it to them. And I'll give them
I'm
feedback.
sorry. Yeah, no, that's not what I meant. But just like the fact that they have a large test looming in front of them means that they have to study and practice and learn for just because that test is there.
Right.
So in that sense, it's a tool.
A goalpost.
It's a motivation. Yeah, a goalpost thing. And so I think those are important motivators, the big finals and the midterms.
Fun fact, I was talking with a German professor, and he was saying in Germany, maybe this is continental Europe generally, they don't give homework or quizzes. They just give final exams. So
Mhm.
you're in your class. It's up to you to study and figure it out. And then at the end, they give you an exam, and that's it.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. I feel like all these like extra credit and drop whatever, and it's just like it's a little too
Babying.
babying.
Mhm.
I think maybe for middle school, fine, but if you're in college, I'm like, you gotta know this stuff.
Well, and we're in a very strange place culturally
Hmm.
because, well, not only are people, went to high school during COVID and their skills are questionable, and do their grades really mean what they purport? Like,
Yeah,
what do they actually know?
right.
Then there's the question of, when and where do we hold people accountable? When
Mhm.
and where do we assume that students are adults?
Hmm.
And one part of the culture says, well, you're 18, you're an adult. Another part of the culture says, when you graduate, then you're an adult.
Hmm.
When you get your bachelor's, then you're an adult.
Hmm.
So that some people view, college as the beginning of your adult responsibility. Other people view college as training for your adult responsibility.
Hmm.
And there's this tension there.
Hmm. What do you think? What is that college age? Is that you've already started to become an adult, or you're training to be an adult?
Well, it's strange because the culture, I'm going to sound old here, but when I was young,
Yeah.
we did calculus in high school, damn it.
Right. We walked butt naked through 30 miles of snow. Shout out to Weird Al.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, there is some of that, um and then there's definitely some, coddling of the American mind
Hmm.
going on, and economic forces too, and new technologies that make learning different or
Hmm.
easier or harder. And I'm old school. I think if you calculate things by hand, it gets into your muscle memory.
Hmm.
There's a huge advocates for online homework and online quizzes. I mean, it's convenient for grading,
Yeah.
but it's not optimal in my view. I mean,
I don't think it's sustainable either. With all these like AI tools and bots,
mhm.
you could probably just download something and like it'll figure out what to do and just submit your homework. And
Well, and then there's an even bigger question: is how useful is mathematics?
if you can just bot it away.
Yeah, like why do you need to know math if you just have an app that
Yeah.
does everything?
It's pretty crazy. So there was actually some article. I mean, it's been happening for a while now, but there's getting a lot of attention in different scientific journals where people are submitting grants. Like grants are these really difficult, long written things, and a lot of people are using AI tools now.
Like Chat GPT.
Yeah, and they write it and they do a pretty good job, and they get funded. And now, when you submit a grant, there's like sections on the application where it's like, if you used AI assistants to write any of this, what portion, and you have there's a disclosure thing where you have to say if you used it. But it's basically becoming more and more accepted for these things that like literally are like the way people fund their research and everything. Now it's like offshore to an AI chatbot, and it's not going away. You can't rewind it.
It's like, well, I mean, it's adapting, right? Because you have this disclaimer thing. It's
Hmm.
like a reaction to it.
Yeah, but I think soon enough, I don't know. I guess we'll see where it goes, but I have a feeling that's just going to be normal. And I don't know if people are going to be writing things standard by hand anymore, or maybe even math.
Well, let's think about the consequences of this. So I'm an advocate for math, generally speaking, because it helps people think abstractly and solve problems
Hmm.
abstractly,
Hmm.
which is a really useful skill. And you could argue it's fundamental logic and puzzles and problem solving, and that's
Hmm.
really useful for life. And the value in writing is that it helps you clarify your thoughts.
Hmm.
And if you take the time to write something and really organize it, you really sharpen the argument in your mind.
Right.
We were talking about this earlier, that a lot of our thinking is language based. And if people let that atrophy, that doesn't seem to be good for human intelligence.
Hmm. I agree. But just to play devil's advocate a little bit, or to make an argument for these kinds of tools, that will alleviate the cognitive burden of all of this like minutia
Or paperwork.
right? And then humans can have more time to apply really what makes them unique for the moment is this creativity and that kind of aspect.
Well, I understand a lot of artists are being displaced by AI.
I've heard too, yeah.
And it's ironic because it was predicted that that would be the last domain to be
one of the
replaced.
first, which is pretty crazy. I think the reason is because it's, if you have a company and you want to make a logo or you want to have a picture of some concept, you can just type it in and it'll give it to you for free. But if you pay an artist, that's extremely expensive. And people are just satisfied with like good enough art to sell my thing, not like a masterpiece. So yeah, that's weird. Have you played with any of that stuff?
I haven't.
Yeah, I have. It's pretty wild. And I don't know.
I might have.
Yeah. And I was making a presentation and trying to find like a picture that would be descriptive of something I wanted to talk about. And I looked on Google Images, usually where I go for that. Let's try this AI thing. It was fun. I was doing it for like hours, just playing with different words. And you put the same prompt in twice and they give you two different things. Like there's some like randomization they have cooked into the thing. But yeah, I don't know. The whole AI thing is going to be very interesting of where it's going. And yeah. So how do you think, since we're on this topic and also education, how do you think AI in education, what are going to be the pros and cons and pitfalls to overcome now that it's become a much more easily accessible tool?
Well, the fundamental question for education is, what do young people need to know in order to live their life?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that the world and culture is changing so fast, it's not really clear what young people need to know.
That's true. Just before, like I know I've talked to some like people who are coding, back in like the 90s or something. That was their job. And it seems like there's new languages coming out all the time and they'd have to like dump everything they had just learned and learn this new thing. And
yeah,
so
it's rough.
And now if you have a degree from like 10 years ago, it's like basically worthless because you have to be constantly in school with the coding stuff. And now it's only getting worse. It sounds like it's accelerating.
Yeah, well, and so one thing that happened is that there was a huge push for social justice in the colleges of education. And, maybe society needed it at the time. But there's this slow process because you have the education system that has teacher credential programs, and then the teachers go into elementary school and they start teaching stuff. And then eventually, so this retooling the education system takes years, decades. And if changing the education system takes decades, but our culture and our world is changing by year, by month.
Our technology, yeah.
It's like, how do you keep up?
Yes, I feel like that is true for anything. Like these companies, how do these companies keep up? Does law, passing laws and things, how does it keep up? Like, I feel like the law system is still trying to like figure out what to do with the internet, like in terms of like privacy laws and like what can you post and what can't you post. Like it's still struggling with this problem back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And, now we have like 1,000 new problems with this technology.
I saw this great quote. I'm gonna mess it up. It said we have it's like we have medieval institutions and I forget what it was.
I think I get the flavor though of where it's going.
They essentially said we have medieval institutions and space age technology.
Right. And the institutions are the ones that are supposed to regulate this like space age technology. It just doesn't make sense. It's like you have a rocket and you're trying to put a saddle on it or something to keep it under control, maybe some spurs on this. It's like that just is not, this thing's going to go so fast, and that technology to control a horse is not going to control this rocket.
Right, like how is the government going to regulate Bitcoin?
Yeah,
They still haven't figured that out.
right.
And then by the time they get that figured out, there's all sorts, hundreds of clones and like all sorts of clients and different trading vehicles, and
It's crazy. Like, I really don't know. But it's also kind of exciting.
there's opportunity for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, so much uncertainty.
But getting back to the education question, like, would you teach kids civics, or would you teach kids how to trade with Bitcoin?
Yeah. Right.
Like, do you teach do you teach them math, or do you teach them how to use a cell phone?
Yeah. Or like if you didn't teach them civics, like maybe what they learned, like something's going to change and all that's going to be useless. That's kind of the argument I was saying with the coding is changing so fast. Like if you go to class, learn how to code, it's like within the next 5 years, all of that's like outdated. So I don't, how do you even predict something like that? And formal education, well, maybe I've heard there's a case, maybe the formal education is kind of for the dinosaurs. I've heard some cases like that. And rather than getting a formal education, just go straight into the workforce. And these companies will move a lot quicker and adapt a lot quicker than these kinds of formal education institutions. Not only that, I've also heard and seen that these colleges are pumping out so many graduates that the market is essentially being flooded with these things, and there's not enough positions for people to use their degree for that job. So they usually just get the degree to say, hey, I have a degree, and then they find something that they're good at. That
Right.
maybe
It
completely
certifies
unrelated.
It certifies a work ethic.
Yeah. And then maybe that's all it is.
Now, the counter argument is for the liberal arts education is that we are cultural beings, and engaging with ideas and art is what makes us whole. Like learning our history and our identity, and what is beauty and where do we come from, is part of the necessary cultivation or civilizing of a person, as opposed to your job on this planet is to work. That's more philosophical territory.
Yeah. Do you ever see the movie or read the book The Giver?
Oh yeah.
It reminds me kind of like, so like, you're assigned at birth, they do some genetic test and some aptitude test. All right, you are a pilot and you are this, and congratulations, everyone claps, and that's what you for the rest of your life. And all emotion and just like history knowledge has been sequestered into this one person. I thought that was fascinating. So even in this sterile society, like you still need that kind of human aspect, passion, and love of art and stuff. I don't know, just a thought, but does that kind of jive with what you were saying, or
yeah, exactly. I mean, the fundamental question of the humanities is, what does it mean to be human? And that's a deep question.
So those things are still, you would say, important. So that would be the argument for formal education, or those kinds of things maybe aren't in demand, and if you just let the market decide, maybe they won't select for those kinds of things.
Well, it also crosses the territory into like religious traditions. We have a freedom of religion, and if you're, if that's part of your identity, do you want to be trained in that and understand that? And this is the root of the culture war, I think, is people have sort of taken the humanities and used it as a way to sort of attempt to navigate or control the evolution of culture.
Okay, so you're commenting more on the kind of divisive uses of the humanities recently in the institutions.
Yeah, I mean, because and you could argue that because it's showing that it's outdated. That's one argument.
Mhm.
And then the counter argument is no, it just needs to be rehabilitated.
Mm.
We need to really know what it means to be human.
Mhm.
And now more than ever.
Mm. Right, because everything's becoming more secularized.
Or computerized.
Yeah.
Like does being human mean we're all necessarily cyborgs now?
Hmm.
Does being human mean, you're what does it mean to be
Right.
human?
Evolution, Morpheus, evolution. I think there's a case for that. Like if you can look out, 10 years in front of us and things aren't going to change. But if you go out 1,000 years, that seems like a very real possibility to me. The Robo sapien, or yeah, and it's not far fetched, in my opinion. I don't know if that's bad. Maybe it is like an evolution.
Could be.
Yeah. But it sounds like you're more of a proponent of humans are important.
Yeah.
What a despicable stance.
Humans are valuable. I think Elon Musk said something like that. He said, I'm a humanitarian in the sense that I'm pro-human.
Right. I remember him commenting, I forgot, some like guy from Google accused him of being a speciesist. And as an insult. And he's like, yes, I think humans are more important than other creatures. This is not a controversial idea.
Yeah. I think it's important to value people.
I agree. I totally agree. But when I just look at like the reality of the trends and where things are going, like if we were to, like, let's say one day explore the galaxy, it's not going to be like some like generation ship where people are like trying to maintain their human biology. That just makes no sense. They just shoot out some AIs and have them programmed to adapt to whatever they find and build. I don't know, but I don't even know why you'd want to do that. It's like there's no humans involved there specifically, but you just want to like put your flag down on wherever you want.
Curiosity.
Yeah, it's all sci-fi stuff, but yeah. Do you think humans would be motivated to do something like that? Like just start launching out probes in all directions, and the only purpose is to like set up shop.
Well, it could be scientific curiosity.
Mm-hmm. But before, like, these things would take like thousands of years to even get to their destination, and then like within that time, like generations of humans would have overturned. So it's like the curiosity benefit is gonna like that's not gonna be a direct, like, you're not directly like addressing your own curiosity. It's, well, someone 10 generations from now will be excited about it. That seems like a pretty crappy motivation to me.
Could be.
Maybe I'm too selfish, but I want to know. I'm curious because it's, my thoughts, my consciousness, my mind. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if I'd want to do that. Even other than the fact that it just seems like a cool thing that you could do. And when we've mastered the physical engineering and understanding and knowledge to perform these kinds of things.
Yeah, like an achievement. Or I mean, you could also argue, eventually the sun's going to burn out, and this is sort of like expanding the, instead of Mars, we need to find another solar system.
Yeah. So there's a good one. Yeah, or Musk's thing basically is, let's count the number of ways life can end on Earth. We need to get out and find a way. Yeah. So maybe there's that. Okay. Well, I think that seems like a good thing to wrap up on, unless you want to add any more last comments on education or thoughts on where it's going, the future of math, anything like that.
The good news, I think, is that developmental psychology is pretty mapped, let's say. And So I think in the same way that there's always going to be a need for barbers, there's always going to be a need for education, there's always going to be a need for doctors. Like I don't think it's going away.
Mm-hmm.
Just a question of what's it going to look like.
Mm-hmm. You know what? I actually just remembered. I heard very recently, was it Ohio passed some law that so I just immediately reminded me of this. They passed some law to where if students pass courses, they actually are getting some kind of an allowance, like a financial
That's a cool idea.
benefit from the government. So if you pass a class, then it's not a lot, but it's like a couple $100. And they're testing it to see if this is going to
Motivate.
improve students to do better. So maybe just if you totally embrace capitalism and not like convince younger adults like this is important and it's interesting and you need to know this, but maybe that doesn't matter. If you give them $100, $200, that could be motivation enough.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of parents do an allowance, right?
Mhm.
It's like, hey, do your chores, do your homework, we'll give you some money.
Yeah. So I think Ohio passed some law where now it's the government, and the government will write these kids a check depending on how they perform. I don't know exactly the ins and outs, but it's going to come from sales tax from the county or something.
And ideally, one of the things that's beautiful about the American system is that there's so many different states with so many different programs.
Mhm.
Ideally, if someone figures something out, that could be shared to the other states.
Mhm.
Like this pilot, let's call it in Ohio.
Right.
If that turns out to be really successful, then that might be
That's
the wave of the future.
That's true. Yeah. That's good. I like talking about positive things. That's good things.
I recently saw this Socratic school. I think it was called Acton. I don't remember exactly. I think it was called Acton.
Socratic. So we're talking about like philosophy?
No, well, style in terms of methodology of teaching. They give students like topics to explore, and then they'll ask them questions to provoke their mind into understanding things.
Like the dialectic. Isn't that when you have like dialogue back and forth? That's a way of learning and exploring.
Yeah. And a lot of it seemed to be self-guided, where they would like pick a topic that they're interested in and go for that, and then be led with questions. And the idea is they're motivated by their own interest, and their own curiosity muscle is built. So they have both the motivation and the practice of figuring stuff out on their own. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. I think there's got to be some major change to the way things are going in terms of education. I don't know what that is. Maybe it is having some kind of an allowance where they can actually get financial returns, or if it's more of like, this sounds a little more creative, kind of like a liberal approach of just, letting them decide what they're interested in, what they want to focus on. Do you think it's necessary to have like a well-rounded education? I think that's also an American cultural idea.
Maybe. I mean, the idea, I think, is you need to know how the country works so you can participate as a citizen. And then once you're a citizen, then you specialize.
Okay. So I guess I know a lot of European countries, it's like right out of high school, you basically are already like specializing. It's like it happens pretty quick.
I think in Japan too, maybe.
I think a lot of countries. I think America's unique in that this like what's a liberal education, where you're required to have a very broad, like all these electives, and you have to have the humanities and the sciences, and that's not as pressed in other countries, from what I understand. Where you start off like straight into like neuroscience or psychology, like very quickly, and you're not required to take anything that you don't necessarily need. And I don't know, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah, I don't have an opinion at the moment.
Okay. Well, my thought is it sounds good. Like if you want to make a worker that's going to complete a task and a job and perform a duty, that makes sense. But I feel like it's having a well-rounded understanding kind of opens your mind up to more possibilities. Otherwise, I feel like you do have maybe a shallower understanding of the world, so you might not be able to connect the dots. Like last time when we were talking, right? We had like the neuroscientists and the cardiologists, and they just lived in their little world. And there's no interaction. But if you knew both of these topics or whatever, the wider the breadth, then you can start making connections conceptually where people didn't see it before. So the narrow specialist, like right out of the gate, makes sense if you want to make someone an expert and do well quickly. Like an engineer, just go straight into engineering, learn that really well, and by the time you're like 24 or something, like you have like PhD understanding of engineering, you can just start going for it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, well, any last comments? Or I know this is the second time I tried to wrap it up, but I get carried away.
All good.
All right. So thanks for chatting.
And hopefully you found it valuable.
Yes. And thanks for joining us. All right.